Well, why don't we get started? So
Yep.
Neil's joining in, and we've had some apologies. So they've said, ask my question and we'll watch it later. So that's good. So,
Okay.
so the
Oh,
first...
actually, that is a point, Andy. We are actually recording this. I thought I'd better actually.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, yeah. I'll try and mind my language.
Oh, that's okay. You're in Australia, so we'll have to edit in some swear words if you don't say anything.
Yes,
I'll put some
yeah.
random ones in. Yeah.
So I suppose the great thing about getting your the biology and understanding that the journey on is about where it all started, because we've all started in gaming somewhere.
Yeah.
What really got you involved, and what's been most memorable that's taken you on this journey?
Well, what got me started was as a 14-year-old schoolboy walking home from school, coming past a tobacconist shop with a little card in the window saying, wargaming, interested in fighting battles with toy soldiers, get in touch with so-and-so. And it turns out that the tobacconist himself had his little warehouse in town, and it wasn't a big thing, but he built a sand table in it, sort of 12-foot by 8-foot sand table, 6-foot sand table. And I went along there one evening and he got it all set out with hundreds of Britain's 54mm American Civil War plastic troops. I don't know if you remember them. They were very vigorous. They had a fantastic galloping horse artillery set. This was from the mid-60s. Or you won't remember it. Anyway, but they're quite a classic set now. Anyway, look, it just blew me away. I just, wow, this is fantastic. This looks great. Because I'd always played toy soldiers, since I was young as I can remember. But it was mostly just sort of flipping marbles at them and things like that, But this was a whole new way of doing it. You had to use tape measures and roll dice and things. And I thought this was great. Anyway, 55 years later, here I am. And been doing it man and boy ever since. So that's what got me going. Most memorable? Well, there's all sorts. Probably taking part in a massive Kriegspiel at Sandhurst in about which is the British military academy, in about 1975. Because I'd met a guy at university who went on to be a lecturer at Sandhurst, called Paddy Griffith, who was an author of some very interesting books. And he was a wargamer, and he was at the University Wargames Club where I went. And he went on to get this job as a lecturer at Sandhurst. Anyway, organised this enormous Kriegspiel of Operation Sea Lion. And it was massive. And I was roped in as naval air umpire, about which I knew absolutely nothing. But Paddy's way with wargaming was he was a very active umpire. So he basically used to wing it all the time, and guess what the sort of odds of some sort of outcome was, and roll a dice, and then if he didn't like the result, he might roll it again. But that was how it worked. But the great thing about it was that they had proper professionals, military types, playing the different active roles. So the German Luftwaffe commander was Adolf Galland, who was the Luftwaffe fighter ace from the Second World War. And so that was amazing. And it was published by the Daily Telegraph as in their colour supplement, Sunday colour supplement. So I've still got a copy, and there I am, surrounded by all these blokes who are now considerably younger than I am now, but there I am, a sort of long-haired, scruffy, bearded, typical 1970s student in an ill-fitting suit, because I'd had to borrow one because I didn't have one at the time. But that was pretty exciting. And there's all sorts of other things, but that was probably a highlight. And meeting Paddy was very good. That got me going with thinking about war games really, rather than just playing them, because he was a sort of philosopher of wargaming, really. Sadly, no longer with us, but we had an interesting correspondence over the years and a friendship. So that was very good. Yeah. Hang on, the voices, the audio's gone.
No, I put my finger down, so I'm not talking all the time. Talking about that war game, in the We Have Ways podcast that Andy and James Holland do, they had a session that actually went and talked about that war game and all the people involved.
Oh, well, there you go.
I'll have to go look up and revisit it now, taking into
well, if you find a group photograph, there's a bloke with long hair and a beard and a dark suit and a white tie sitting in the background somewhere. Considerably slimmer than the current version, but there you go. Yeah, that was good fun. Staying at Sandhurst was great. Yeah, because if you I thought it was a bedside light. I switched this bedside light, and anyway, this manservant turned up and asked if I needed it.
That was your valet.
Yeah, it was good.
So you were doing the umpiring instead of playing.
Yeah.
Change your perspective of gaming at the time, or that you were just taking it?
Yeah, I think. Well, I think I learned from Paddy that an umpire is a useful thing to have, even in a very structured game, like billhooks. It's still good to have an umpire just to make a decision when people can't agree on something. But that was a much more active style. That was the German Kriegspiel style, where it was all done by the umpire. Now, if the players are prepared to go along with it, that's fine. But sometimes they aren't. But I've always liked having the role of umpire. You get the big picture, of course, far more than you do when you're actively playing. Because once you're in a big game, particularly if you're down one end of the table, you haven't really got any idea what's going on the other end. You're focused on what's going on there, so you can see the big picture. But I've always been more interested in the writing and researching a game than actually playing it. I mean, the playing of a war game is the tip of an iceberg, isn't it, in the hobby? You spend 95% of your time not playing war games when you're a war gamer. You're doing other things, you're painting or you're reading or you're wasting time in other ways. But yeah. So
the number of people
playing is probably the least important part for me. Yeah.
Or down at the club today, so there were spectators to the games because people just wanted to come down and see what was happening as well, irrespective of the games that were being played.
I've never really seen it as a spectator sport, but maybe.
Maybe it's the social aspect of clubs as well.
Well, it's always the social aspect. I mean, it's a male activity, isn't it? It's a male bonding activity. It could be fishing, it could be darts, it could be anything else, really. It just happens to be this is what's brought us together, and it's the spending time in congenial company that's the attractive part of it, really. But it is the icing on the cake, as I say. It's a very solitary hobby most of the time. But you do need to come together again and chew the fat and that sort of thing. But, yeah.
So when you write rules and you've got into the rule writing and all the history behind it, are you doing it for yourself, or are you specifically doing it because you want to share it with other people?
I'm doing it for myself initially, and then I think it's a runner. I will enjoy sharing it with other people. But for every finished set, there's probably at least one or two ones that I've given up on and thinking this isn't going to work, or it's the sort of thing that I quite enjoy, but I can't see it working for other people. They wouldn't enjoy it, or they wouldn't want to play it again. So I set it aside. But every failure is a step on the road to success, isn't it? So I don't mind that. I've got under here. I must have, I don't know how many sets of rules I've written over the years in one of these drawers, but very few of them actually get published. Back in the day, when which is by which I mean the sort of 1980s onwards, I used to publish quite a lot in the British wargaming magazines. But back in those days, you had a set of rules published in a magazine, that was it. If you hadn't got the copy of the magazine, that was it. It was gone forever. No such thing as the internet, So they were very much fire and forget sort of things. So I did used to move on quite frequently. I mean, this billhooks thing has taken off to such an extent that I've done very little actual new rules writing in the last 2 or 3 years, apart from working on sort of offshoots of this, which will be coming out in the next few months.
So one of the questions that we're asked to ask is, were you surprised about the success of Billhooks?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, because it was just something that I'd knocked together for use with my little local group. It emerged really because we'd played Lion Rampant and we played Saga, and the bits that I didn't really enjoy them. I thought, no, this isn't very. It's a bit too stylized. I wanted something a bit more quick and friendly. So I thought, I'll take it where I do something. So I took some mechanisms from one set of rules and another set of rules and sort of shook it all up and made it into a new cocktail, because there's nothing very original in Billhooks. It's got mechanisms that H.G. Wells would recognize, let alone Donald Featherstone. But it's just all sort of blended together, and the best thing about it from my point of view is it produces a very good-natured game. People don't get upset about losing because so much of it is down to the turn of the cards and the roll of the dice and things like that. You think, oh, well, that's just the way it goes. Let's have another go. So it might work out better this time. And because I played games all the time, and people get really picky and obsessive about every detail of moves and ranges and all this sort of business. But in my view, war games, it's a social activity. If you're not enjoying it, why are you doing it? So I set out from the start to produce something that was going to be fun, as they say, and that's how it's turned out. So yes, it's been a fantastic success as far as I can see. But I don't really know what the formula is. I couldn't replicate it. It's just one of those things that just works, out of the box. And I could write another set of rules and it'd be a complete flop. So,
So one of the key things that you talked about is designing rules that you think are fun for other people. So it could be you think it's fun, but if it's not going to be fun for someone else, you don't take it any further. And
yeah. I mean, I might enjoy it. Especially as umpire, I can see fiendish things happening that bugger up everybody's best laid plans. But if they're not going to enjoy it, I don't think that's right. I mean, when I produce a set of rules and try it out on people, I want to think you're going to want to play unless you're going to want to play this again, it's a failure. It may have worked as far as satisfying my wish to recreate a particular period or style of warfare. But if people don't want to play it again, it's not a game, is it? It's just an exercise. So when I first was trying Billhooks out on my local group, it was when they said, oh yeah, let's do it again next week. I thought, I'm onto something here. But it was only when a friend of mine mentioned it to Dan Falconbridge, the editor at Wargames Illustrated. He said, I think Andy's onto something here. That we took it down to them and tried it out on them, and they said, oh yeah, this is good, let's do this. And it's gone on from there. So I've been as surprised as anybody, but it's very gratifying after 55 years in the trade to finally have a hit. It was great.
So if you were to go back into the early 80s, when you said you were starting to publish and go to the magazines and you put them out, and then you look at what you did 10 years ago, has your philosophy around games design and what you think is fun and put in there changed, or is it the same?
Oh, it's I've got rid of a lot of all the quirky, clever stuff that I used to do back in the 1980s. I used to have fancy mechanisms for the sake of it, really. And we were still suffering from the legacy of the sort of 1970s approach to wargaming, which was people were trying to make it more respectable than just playing with toy soldiers. And they were trying to apply sort of time and motion ideas to what a man could do in a particular amount of time. And, it doesn't bear any relations to what a large number of men can do in a particular amount of time. The example I always use is, you may be able to walk a mile in 20 minutes when you're doing your morning constitutional, but if you try and get even half a dozen middle-aged ramblers to do that, you're going to double the time at least, let alone come across any fences or walls or anything else that's going to slow you up completely. So a lot of that went out of the window. And people, then there was the different shaped dice technology. People jumped onto that, and you could have D12s and D10s and D8s and D4s and God knows what else. So increasingly, as the years have gone by, I've gone back to using tried and tested mechanisms and simple things. So I never use anything other than the D6s because everybody understands D6s. And as I said before, I mean, a lot of the mechanisms in billhooks would be very familiar to Donald Featherston in the early 1960s. The one thing that, but the card-driven turn sequence is relatively new, although that was coming in the early 1990s. I think the first example of that was a Milton Bradley game in conjunction with Games Workshop called Battle Masters, which was a big sort of fantasy thing, and that used the card-driven turn sequence, and that's taken off, and that takes a lot of the because back in the day we used to do simultaneous movement, didn't we? And then I go, you go, and it was and none of them were really conducive to a enjoyable and aggravated war game. Whereas so again, that's a good word. There's too much aggravation in too many war games, so I try to avoid it if I can, because I like to keep my friends. I've seen people fall out over stupid decisions on war games tables. It's, and you lose friendships over it. What's the point? It's just a game. Come on.
We've all had experience of throwing dice, and some people who love their miniatures, and it's like that's a bit of a shame, taking it too seriously.
Yeah.
From how you've described it, looking at it, you've got the scientific war game.
Yes.
Trying to get a simulation, trying to capture detail, versus this is a game that we wanted to mirror real life aspects, but ultimately we're playing a game for fun.
Yes. Yeah, you are.
More in that boat?
Very, very much so. Very much so. I mean, simulations are all very well, but warfare is all about danger to life, limb, reputation, and fortune, and you haven't got any of that. So it's not a simulation at all, is it? It's like well, no, unless you have a game where if you lose a battle, you have to smash all your figures up with a hammer at the end of it, or something like that, or chop a finger off. Well, no, it's not a real simulation, is it? It's just a rather turgid mathematical exercise. But there you go. So
one of the things that
people do like turgid mathematical exercise. There are people out there who like that sort of thing, but they're not the sort of people I like to play war games with. Unfortunately, you have to have all sorts in a war games club, unless they're self-selecting. But which is why I've never really been in a war games club. I've always played with little groups of friends rather than formal clubs. Maybe that's a shortcoming of mine, but that seems to have worked for me. So yeah.
I think that's where most people play, is with small groups of friends, because whilst we have a sizable club, it's still friendship groups. It's all about growing more, but most people don't even know clubs exist unless they get exposed to it one way or another. Got a question about, so your experience of gaming with friends. Have you always been playing in someone's houses, or in the UK and space you go and play down in the pub?
The tradition is you go to somebody's house, and if they're fortunate, they've got a dedicated games room. I think a couple of I've only just got that for myself in the last 5 years. It all came out of COVID and lockdown. I decided to convert my garage, so I've got a nice permanent war game set up there. But for 50 years I never had one. But I've I've been to quite palatial war games rooms. I've been to rather scruffy little affairs down in somebody's damp cellar, but it's. I mean, if the company's good, you don't really mind. You don't really notice the surroundings.
So, talking about company and surroundings, etc., can you tell us some stories about what's been the best experiences you've had at playing games that have been very memorable that you would love to be able to repeat or share with people?
Well, I've talked about Operation Sea Lion. That was unrepeatable. I went to a game with the Perry twins here in Nottingham. I've never seen anything quite so palatial as that. I mean, that was an enormous table. I mean, if you've ever played Black Powder, you can see why they get the rules are geared to their table. Basically, it's about 15 feet long and 7 feet wide or something. Surrounded by thousands and thousands of display cases with exquisitely painted figures. They don't all do them; they get other people to do them for them. That's the great thing. And the most astonishing collection of militaria I've ever seen. Sort of original Napoleonic uniforms and God knows what. I mean, wow. They have certainly scored big in the hobby there. Billhooks is nothing quite approaching that, I'm afraid. I was able to take my wife on a nice holiday, but that's on the proceeds. But that's about as good as it gets, really, because it's not a way of becoming rich unless you produce a range for the Lord of the Rings films. I think that's what really did it for them. But anyway, that was pretty amazing. Yeah, and but it's took me to lots of good places. The little games in somebody's back bedroom can be just as much fun as one of these big affairs. So yeah, it's all about the company.
So, what would be the best way to play Billhooks?
I think it works best as a two-player game, although frequently I have it as 3-a-side or something. Two-player game, with about 120 points aside, 3 commanders, a couple of people who know the rules, and some beers on the side to keep things lubricated. And then with any luck, you should have time for 2 games in an evening with that sort of setup. We should even things out.
So, one of the things that I enjoy most about games, and I think Billhooks is a good example of this, is it doesn't really matter how you're playing over the game. It really comes down to the last couple of dice rolls or the end of the turn, and it's all in the balance because you've all been engaged at that time, and it really comes down to what's at the end. Was that something that you designed on purpose, or it's just?
I think it was a happy accident. Although I have to say that you read about Wars of the Roses battles, and they often just turn in an instant, right at the end. I mean, Taunton's the best example. The Yorkists were losing all day, and then right at the end, it turned, and there was a sudden collapse, and the Lancastrians were driven off, and that happens very frequently in Billhooks. In fact, the Taunton game where they had 1,500 figures aside on the table, exactly the same thing happened. Right at the very end of the final turn, Edward launched a counterattack, and it led to a local success, which led to a massive domino-like collapse of the enemy morale. Exactly the same. You couldn't have scripted it any better. So that is built in. But I think as I said before, it's a mixture of mechanisms that somehow, by some sort of magic, produce this credible historical outcome. Lost the audio again, Lorne.
So that's a good segue into the question that Jeff, our president, whose wife told him he couldn't attend tonight. So I've got his question.
Yeah.
He's on the bill, and he goes and says, can you ask Alan, what was the process for working out the casualties and morale system? Because was there probabilities involved, or it just sounded like a good way to do it for yourself?
The process was writing war games rules for 50 years. and having a sort of instinctive feel for what was about right. Of course, you know, I rolled lots of dice and played around with it in the process. But I mean, you know, you look at the archery, you know, 60 to hit at long range, 560 hit at short range. I mean, come on, that goes back to this. Has got to be straight out of Donald Featherstone. And the morale thing, well, you know, trial and error, I'd say, but starting from 50 years worth of trial and error, getting you halfway down the track before you even start. So yeah.
So do you feel that?
So I can't give you a sort of, you know, oh well, just take. I can't give you a formula for it. It's just, oh, that feels about right. I'll just adjust that. It's like cooking a meal, isn't it? You know, you can follow a recipe, or you can draw on your experience of cooking hundreds of meals over the years and think, oh, that needs a bit more of this, or I'll put a dash of that in just to, you know, that's what it's like, really.
And that's because you've got an idea of what you want the end result to feel like.
Yeah.
Sometimes
that's right.
The ingredients don't match up, so you have to play around with it. So,
of course, yeah.
Is it fair to say that you want the game to be driven by morale-driven aspects rather than necessarily?
Very much so. I mean, you know, that's been true of all my games over the 50 years, really. The human element's the key thing. It's not the technology. It's how men react on the battlefield. Because if you just took technology, you know, the better weapons are always going to win. But it's not like that. I mean, the other big, wasn't a big success, but the other one where rules has had any traction was a set of American War of Independence rules called Loose Files and American Scramble, that was published in about 1985, and it's been republished 2 or 3 times since, and people still play it around the world. But that was very much based on my reading of the battles of the American War of Independence, because you know, you come into it with a sort of predetermined idea that it was, you know, stupid redcoats marching around in ranks and being shot down by, you know, wily frontiersmen, you know, hiding behind trees and things. But you read about it, and actually the Brits won most of the battles, and they won it through morale and training and getting stuck in with the bayonet, which is, you know, doesn't sound right at all. But so that was interesting. It was trying to make a game out of that. And what I did was I wrote a set of rules specifically for the American War of Independence. I didn't take a set of 7 Years' War rules and add knobs on, and I didn't take a set of Napoleonic rules, and I set it specifically for that. I knew what I wanted to get, the outcome I wanted to get, and I wrote the rules to do it. So the Brits will win by taking casualties, taking disorder, but sorting themselves out, and then getting stuck in with the bayonet. And if you do that, you will win. If you stand around trying to trade fire with all these Americans, you're not going to win. So follow the tactics of the time, and that will give you the right outcome. But it's all down to morale and training, and that's what's really done it. And so with billhooks, both sides have the same technology. So it's all got to be down to this sort of intangible morale element. Nobody's come up with a better way of doing it than rolling dice. You know, where would we be without dice? The game would be dull, wouldn't it?
No dice.
Very
and
dull.
also draw of the card.
Exactly. Yes. The dice, because the dice goddess is a capricious deity. She's an absolute bitch. You cannot rely on her at all. She will come up with the most extraordinary results. And to take for example, in billhooks, you know, when you've got a gun, roll 3 ones and it blows up. Now the odds of that are, you know, about 6% or so. But how often does it happen? All the bloody time, you know. We had one game where the guy had 2 guns and they both blew up on the first turn. Now, you know, that's completely implausible, but you know. Good.
We should call that the Golding maneuver. One of the things about the deluxe edition was bringing in the different periods. Now,
yes,
at the club, we're still very much War of the Roses.
Well, that's fine. That's what it's there for.
Yeah, but very keen to see the approaches for other periods and perhaps have an understanding of where do you think billhooks can be played or adapted into? Yeah, I quite like Dark Ages or other things. So, what do you have plans to take it further or work with other collaborators as well?
Yeah. Well, the thing about the deluxe one was that there was about half a dozen other people from other countries in Europe who picked up on the game and said, "Well, there's this, there's the Hussite wars in Bohemia." So a guy in Czech Republic got in touch. There was, the Scots and the Irish, and there's a guy in Portugal, and and since then it's gone a bit further. In the pipeline, we've had people in Italy writing one specifically for sort of 14th, 15th century condottieri warfare. That will be coming out soon. There's a guy in Poland's written one for something called the 13 Years' Wars, about 1450 to 60. That was between the Polish Kingdom and the Teutonic Knights, so that's quite interesting. No doubt there'll be others coming up. Spanish guy's written one about warfare between Turks and Hungarians. That hasn't been translated yet, but that may well come. People started talking fairly early on about using it for fantasy games, and I'd already toyed around with that. I'd come up with a sort of fantasy version for my grandsons, but then so I mentioned that, and quite a few people, yeah, we could do that. So that's going to be coming out in probably 3 or 4 months' time. It'll be like a supplement, like an extra chapter for the deluxe version. It's not really my thing, but I thought, well, I better do it. If I don't do it, somebody else will, so I might as well do it. And then in recent months, we've been working on an English Civil War version, which will inevitably be called Never Mind the Matchlocks. And that will be coming out as a full set of rules probably around Christmas this year. And that's working pretty well. Again, using very similar mechanisms. There's a little bit of extra bells and whistles in there, but the basic card-driven stuff is working very well. So, yeah.
Have you got anyone working a little bit more towards antiquity, or a century or so?
Well, if you look on the Facebook page, that somebody came out with an early early medieval version called Never Mind the Bannerets. That's one of the very first posts on the Facebook page, actually, on the in the files section, and that sort of takes it from 1066 onwards. And there's also a variant of that for more Dark Age warfare. If you look on the files section, you'll find it, and that's taken in all sorts of armies from about the I suppose 7th or 8th centuries, that sort of thing. So yeah.
One of the observations I had with people, and we talked early before we officially started about Games Workshop and people moving on and the epicenter of Nottingham.
Yeah.
How would you describe the gaming industry today compared to what it was like 25, 30 years ago?
Oh, well, I don't know about 25, 30 years ago. Well, what's taken up? What's the internet's the big thing, isn't it? You can find out anything. Might not be entirely 100% reliable, but I mean, you and I, we've got these hundreds of books, haven't we? But most of the time, I'll just Google it. I've probably got books on it as well. I'm just looking here. I've just counted while I was. I've got 21 books on the Crimean War. What on earth do I need 21 books on the Crimean War for? But 200 Ospreys. How is it different? Multi-part plastic figures are a big thing, aren't they? They weren't around 20 years ago. I'd always got. Most of my armies then were still 20 mil, because that's how I started out with the Airfix plastics, and then you moved on to Hint and Hunt or Minifigs 20 mil. So most of my armies then were 20 mil. But recent years I've gone for the 28 mil stuff because it's so nice. It's easier to paint as well with these old eyes. The bigger figures are very easier. But the hobby now is unrecognizable from what it was when I started out. Like I say, you had Airfix, you had little Airfix, or you had Big Britons, and that was it. And if you wanted to do anything than what Airfix produced, you had to muck around and convert them with drawing pins and bits of plasticine and stuff like that. But I won't say it was better then, because it wasn't. It was crap, really. But these days, you can get pretty well everything, anything, can't you? Any sort of figure from any period you can get. Well, I don't know whether you can in Australia, but you can here. Not well, you can get them, but not without paying extortionate shipping costs. But that's another reason why the metals are going out, because the raw materials gone up and the shipping costs have gone up. I don't know why shipping costs have gone up. Why have they gone up so much?
I
can order.
Offices don't work anymore. Or commercial.
Yeah. Do you still have the tyranny of distance over there? Do you think, or is that gone? You do.
Yes. It's 10 o'clock, 10:30 your time, and it's 7:30 here, and that's because daylight savings has worked in our connection.
Yeah.
But I think the internet has been a great leveler in terms of being able to access things. I used to buy stuff from mail order catalogs, and Navwar still does it, where you had to take it and fax it in. You never know when you're getting stuff back.
Oh, that's true.
So the availability, well, to be able to see what's out there and have people show their
absolutely
work.
I mean, back you'd send off for stuff 20, 30, 40 years ago, and you'd no idea what it looked like, because they didn't have digital photos you could just click on to see what the stuff was like. You sort of, it took a punt, and you could either be satisfied or very dissatisfied. I remember my brother bought a whole army from one manufacturer in about the 1980s. They were horrible. It's just a complete waste of money. But you couldn't see what they were before he sent off for it. Yeah. It's raised the whole painting level as well, hasn't it? The painting standards have gone up massively, because you can see this stuff out there and think, crikey, I can't even get close to that. I'm still very much, if it looks okay from 2 feet, it's good enough for me, really. But certainly the people I play with are much more talented painters than I am. I'm very, very utilitarian. If it looks okay from a distance, it's good enough. But so it's a different part of the hobby, isn't it?
What do you think of the number of rule sets that are available now? But you said you used to put them in the magazines and they were out there and gone.
Yeah.
Is the number of rules and books the same as it was, or are there more now?
You know about more because it's easier to find out about them. I mean, when they used to be published, in-house as a sort of staple together little production in very small print, you didn't really know what was out there unless you went to a show and sort of happened to see it on a stand. Whereas nowadays, it's very easy to find out what's coming out, and there's an awful lot coming out, which is why Billhook's success has been, a bit of a surprise, because you've got a lot of competition out there.
But you were
are there too many?
I think as well. There wasn't a lot of. There wasn't a lot of War of the Roses stuff at the time.
No.
So you had a nice niche, and then you've expanded across that, I suppose, as people like the Metal elsewhere.
Yeah. No, that's right. Again, it was like I was talking about with the American War of Independence one. I wanted to get a right set of rules about a specific, very, very specific period. Although as I was writing it, I thought, well, this is probably going to work for the 100 Years' War or Italian Wars. But let's focus at least on that. So the spin-offs have been a sort of cherry on the cake, really. The main satisfaction was producing a enjoyable and credible Wars of the Roses rules, because actually the Wars of the Roses battles, the big ones anyway, they're a bit boring, really. They're a great big scrum, aren't they, really? I know there's a lot of tactical finesse goes into it. There's far more tactical finesse in the game of Billhooks than there was in a real Wars of the Roses battle, I think. Which is why I pitched it initially at a sort of lower level than the big ones. But of course, there's no figure man scale, so you know your 12-man company can be anything really. So
So
yeah, cool.
the billhooks audience, the people who are playing billhooks.
Yeah.
Do you think that you've got new people into the period, or people who have found that really interesting and have got into the game and it's been a good entree into wargaming, or are they all?
I'd have thought so, because as I say, Wars of the Roses is a bit boring, really. The real battles. So yeah, I think so. I think the availability of the periplastics is a great thing, because they're lovely figures, and they're pretty well over here. They're pretty cheap to get an army up and running. I don't get any commission from them, by the way, or they must have sold thousands of boxes on the back of this. But you know, there you go. Yeah, it has brought new people to this period. It's very colourful, isn't it? And they look great. You know, all those flags and things. They're great, brilliant.
It goes back to the first point in your first experience on the sand table at the back of the shop.
Yeah,
it was visually spectacular, and you know, picked everything.
Well, that's it. It's a very visual hobby, isn't it? I'll often be inspired as much by a picture or painting as a historical account, or a film. You know, wouldn't that look great to have an army like that on the table? And you know, I've played war games with, you know, blocks of wood as well, but it's not the same. And I've played naval games with, you know, a couple of ships aside. It's not, but having the hundreds of the figures. I mean, one of the real pleasures of the hobby, and is once you've finished your army, is just lining it up and gazing at it. I find myself doing that. I've finally finished this thing. It's taken 6 months or however. And I just line them up and look at them. And then having them on the table is just, you know, it's just an extra thing, really. But it's getting to the end product. So it is visual. It's a visual hobby. And
cheaper miniatures and access to plastics is great, but at the end of the day, the major investment in our hobby is collecting it all, painting it all, making sure it's right so we can put it out on the table, which is
it's time. Yeah. It's a very safe hobby for a man to have. Wives approve of it. My wife wasn't quite sure about us. I played battles with toy soldiers when we first met up, but when she realised it involved me sitting in a room on my own, or going to a club with lots of other middle-aged men, she thought this is pretty good, actually, because her first husband ran off with somebody met at the squash club, so there was no danger of that happening with this particular hobby. So she quite approves of that sort of thing. And I've now got her into visiting castles and battlefields and things. She quite likes that, so that's good.
My wife, we were living on the other side of the country when we met, and she came over, and I got her to paint some figures. I thought, this is okay. Well, she's never done it since, but that's okay.
No, I wouldn't. I think I'd be pushing my luck if I asked for that. But yeah, I might get the grandchildren to do some spraying. That's some spray undercoating. They probably quite like that.
Oh, they'll probably enjoy that.
Yeah.
Don't get them too close. So we've got a few people on the line here, and because we're using a different system, I think it's easier if anyone wanted to ask some specific questions or get your advice on anything. So why don't we open the floor to others who might want to have a chat?
Okay. Don't be shy.
John, you had a question. Some questions. Oh, did you send some questions in? All right, Andy, I'll ask the inevitable one. Another rule set for another period?
Yeah. I had a set published in Wargames Illustrated #1, and they're getting up to about 430 something. So I'd like to have something published in #500 if I'm still around. So I need to get one in the bank, really, just in case the Grim Reaper comes knocking. Yeah, I've got an idea for one. It'll probably be Marlborough period. and it won't be anything to do with billhooks at all.
Mhm.
So that's probably the one I'll go for. But as I say, I'll try and get it banked before in the next couple of years, just so they can have it in 7 or 8 years time. Because I just hit 70. I just hit 70 last few weeks ago.
Young fella.
Yeah.
Featherstone was gaming till his late 80s, so you know.
Yeah, good for him.
Yeah.
Good for him.
We have a member who's only just started gaming in his late 70s.
Oh, fantastic. Can he still do the painting, though?
He does.
Good for him.
Great that he's painting, and try to encourage him to keep on doing it irrespective of the standard, because it's better than having metal, plastic, or just undercoated. So the fact that he's doing it is great.
Yeah, good.
Do you have a favorite?
Well,
Sorry, Andy. Do you have a favorite period other than, obviously Wars of the Roses, but
not really. I mean, over the years, I've done everything. I've got armies from ancient Egypt to Vietnam. No, not really.
Standard wargaming.
I would say generally pre 20th century is. So I'm not, because it's the pre 20th century stuff I'm mostly interested in. Probably pre 18th century, probably I would say. Although I've happily played more modern periods. When I started out, modern was Second World War. That was modern rules were Second World War. Yeah.
With Never Mind the Matchhooks.
Yeah.
Is there like what led you to sort of start thinking about this one as a viable?
It was somebody on the Facebook page saying they were thinking of could it be adopted to this later period. Initially, I thought, well, not really, because you got a much better command structure in place. The weaponry's already. But then, the more I thought about it, especially there's a similar thing, because actually the big English Civil War battles, like Naseby or Marston Moor or Edgehill, they're pretty boring as well. Like the Wars of the Roses one, because basically you have two cavalry wings go at each other. One of them runs away. The infantry gets stuck in the middle. Nothing really much happens until one of the cavalry wings pulls in, and that's it. It's all over then. So they're a bit boring. But actually, the English Civil War was much more about smaller encounters. There were lots and lots of little battles. The more you read about it, and they were pretty chaotic affairs with, sudden morale collapses. And I thought, well, actually, maybe the old card-driven turn sequence and some of the billhooks mechanisms will work. And actually, the more I thought about it, it did. I mean, as I say, I put some new bells and whistles in there, but anybody who's played billhooks will find it very easy to adapt to this one. And as I say, it will give it's another game where it's a fun game with a credible historical outcome, and that's all you can really hope for. What I hope for, anyway.
Finally, from me, and I'm sure you've probably been asked this a million times already, but I've never known the answer. Are you a Sex Pistols fan?
Am I what?
A Sex Pistols fan.
No, it's just pure punnery. That's all. No. It just came to me when we were talking about the game in its very early stages. I thought, yes. It's a stupid thing, but it's memorable, isn't it? Because most war games rules come up with some sort of horrible, honor and glory, or cheese and onion, or whatever they call themselves, or when they do it in Latin as well, oh God, come on. And it sets the tone, doesn't it? Because well, come on, it's got to be a bit. It's pretty light-hearted. Yeah,
it is. My son found my copy of Never Mind the Billhooks, and he asked me where'd that come from, and I sort of figured it was from the first album, so I played him that album, and he was
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. No, I think it's memorable, and it sums up the overall tone of the game. So
Certainly does.
So talking about games,
yeah.
which other games do you play, or are there any other companies out there or writers out there that you would recommend?
I've been known to play Black Powder because some of my other local friends play it. I had to unlearn everything I thought I knew about Napoleonic war games when I started playing Black Powder, because it's very different. But again, it gives a quick and enjoyable and sociable game, so I can see its attractions there. I mean, I've played enormous, turgid Napoleonic games, that have gone on all day, and you just end up with a throbbing headache, and or as often is the case, you can look at the initial deployment and think, well, in 5 hours' time, that's going to happen. There's nothing I can do about it. So they're more fun. So that's all right. A writer I admire would be Sam Mustafa in America. He's very good. And he's incredibly prolific. I don't know how he does it, but his games are always very, very clever. The mechanisms are very clever. He's a smart guy. The one thing I sometimes have problems with is that I can appreciate his games as a rule writer, but it's hard to get people to commit to playing them more than once or twice. That's maybe just my little group, but I have found that he did Blucher a few years ago. I got very excited about that. And I tried it out on my local group. I think we only played it 3 times. I said, shall we have Blucher again? Oh, no. Let's do something else. So that's gone by the by. But I can appreciate it. It's like, I don't know, it's like a highbrow movie or something. You think, oh, that's very smart, isn't it? But, you're not going to watch it again. As I say, the essential thing is this a game I want to play again, or I can get my friends to want to play again. I think that's when a game is really successful. It can be successful in terms of satisfying certain ideas, but unless it's something you want to play again, it gets put back on the shelf.
Done in an evening, you have some laughs. You feel was engaged, and when you want to come back.
Yeah, exactly. Yes.
Any other questions from the audience? Phil, John, Neil, Julian?
May I? You alluded, or you mentioned the CeeLo game with Callan.
Yeah.
Can you talk a bit? I've read about that, and I must say, I find it really interesting. Can you talk a little bit about that? As I recall the result, even Callan agreed that the Brits would win.
Yes.
And I took a view, because I'm cynical, that was perhaps a little propaganda-ish. So can you talk a little bit about that experience? I know it's a little off topic, but I would have thought that would have been a remarkable experience.
Yes, it was. I was about 19, 20 at the time, surrounded by all these very eminent people. It was done at Sandhurst. They'd set up a huge there was a lecture hall it was done in, and they made this big map on the floor, with wooden symbols for units and ships and all that sort of things, and people pushing them around moving them around. They didn't have attractive young waifs pointing them around with long sticks, but apart from that, I didn't have a big picture because, as I say, I was naval air, so it was all sort of attacks on warships really. So I didn't really get to see too much of what was going on, but the key thing was the RAF been able to launch from local airfields, so they had a lot more operational time, whereas the Luftwaffe had to dodge back to France every, they couldn't get. I think they could operate more in about 20 minutes, as they run out of fuel, and that was the key thing. And also so you had the air was dominating the channel and able to attack shipping, and also the Royal Navy had loads of destroyers. The Germans had lost most of their destroyers in Norway, so that was one of the key things that scuppered the whole plan. But they got a landing, and it was looking a bit touch and go at some point. But eventually, the High Command pulled the plug on it and decided to evacuate. And they cut cards to work out how many got away. they do a 10 and a 4, so that meant 10,400 troops got back to France. It was as simple as that. But it was very satisfying, all over in about 8 hours, I would say, but all very intensive. And then we all went off and had a celebratory meal in the officers' mess. So it was very good.
As you would. So I'm sitting here cutting out 3D printed figures. You talk. Well, the best thing. So I'm a little like you. Most of my figures are 20 mils because I'm a little younger than you, but we're not going to cut straws. And I spent, my sort of years before discovering girls and sport, I think, with the 20 mil Airfix figures. So the 28s, when you get them in, so I've got my little Aussies here, you can't see that, it's all right. When you get the 28s, you just downscale them to whatever scale you like to.
Yeah.
5's kind of my scale of choice.
Yeah.
But kind of do you have a view on the 3D printing impact on wargaming?
Well, it's obviously the future, isn't it? Because that will overcome your problems with the tyranny of distance, won't it? You don't have to rely on mail shifting stuff overseas to you. Who knows where it's going to go? The only thing I would say is that the actual printing of them has been described to me as a whole new hobby in itself.
No, it's a disease. It's not a hobby, it's a disease.
Yeah. So, am I ready at my stage of life to take on a whole new technology, or should I just get somebody else to do it for me? And I think that's what I'm going to do. I can see the attraction of printing your own, but actually it's too much of a faff, so I'll get somebody else to do it. Also, you're going to be able to produce these figures without the 28 mil multi-part plastics are lovely, but they take an age to put together, and they're getting increasingly complicated with all the different bits. So printing the damn things has got to be good. But like I say, I think I'll rely on somebody else to do it for me. But it's clearly the future. If they can find a way of printing them in colour, even better. But I think that's maybe a step too far. But we'll see. Who knows? Nobody could have predicted this, could they? 20 years ago.
No,
they can print in colour. It's just bloody expensive.
Yeah.
So and it is a disease, and I often look at this pile of printing in front of me going, at which point am I going to stop printing and start painting?
Well, you have to say that this hobby, hobby expands to fill the space available, doesn't it?
Exactly.
There's all these books, I've got a garage full of bloody figures, and it's all landfill, isn't it? It's all landfill. There's got to be. Wow. I'm sure everybody's got an agreement. Well, when I put my clothes, you can all come round and choose whatever you like. And there's going to be one of these days. There's going to be a 98-year-old wargamer with a warehouse full of everybody else's stuff, and then that's all going to be, when he goes, that's going to be landfill as well. So it's increasingly it shows. You do see in England anyway. You do see people selling off, Charlie's popped his clog, so they're selling his collection off, raise a bit of money for the family. But
There's
Well,
a group up in Sydney called the War Library who do that. They actually reach out with people who know that they're passing or with estates to take off and realise income for the families and find it for
very good. That's great.
You got any plans to come down and visit Australia?
Probably not. I did a 6-month job swap in the mid-80s. I was at the University of Sydney for 6 months, and I did pop over to Melbourne because I had a friend who was researching at the University of Melbourne then. He's an ancient historian called Nick Secundi. He writes ospreys on Alexander the Great. He's now a professor in Gdansk in Poland. So no, I don't think so. Probably not. Long haul flights, that sort of thing. There's plenty to see in Europe.
That's right. Anyhow, so we're running a show in August, so the guys from War Library are going to come down, and one of the things we're going to ask them to talk about is estate planning and what you're going to do with your collection.
Yes, that's a good idea.
Because it's not something that people cover off in their wills, and the public trustees don't know how to do it from an executor. So
yeah. Interesting. Yeah.
On that gruesome topic, in another club I'm in, we have a pact where we all sign each year, and if one of them pops off, so there's rule number 1 is you can't die, and if you die, you get expelled from the club. But if you're a party to the pact, the club as a group will dispose of your modelling assets at best price they can for the estate. So that
very good.
It's kind of got around it.
Yeah.
It's a sad inevitability.
Yes, that's good. Good. We'll have to think about something like that. Very good.
Very good. Well, look, we've taken a lot of your morning, and really appreciate the time of you. One, agreeing.
Well, it's always good. It's always good to talk to fellow wargamers, wherever they may be. So
I've got one more question. Sorry, Andy.
Yeah.
Oh, just a quick one. Do you tend to hang on to your books and armies and stuff? And I know I do. Was there an army or a book or something in the past that you gave away because you thought you weren't interested in the period anymore, that years later you kicked it?
Yeah, a Wars of the Roses setup. All my Wars of the Roses, 25 mil Wars of the Roses, and all the books. I got rid of them about 10 years ago. I had to start again. So I learned from that. But it always happens, doesn't it? You've had something in your hobby room for 15 years. And you think, I'm never going to use this. I'll get rid of it. 6 weeks later, you want it.
Yeah. So
why did
remember to hang on to your. Yep. So hang on to your 21 Crimean War books, because you might end up with Never Mind the Light Brigade.
That's right. Yeah. All the balaclavas. Yeah. Yeah. So don't never chuck anything away, especially if you painted it yourself. I think is the answer. But once you run out of space, you have to stop. Because my wife went up into the loft the other day. She said, "What is all this stuff?" You found it. Yeah, because I'm a sucker for board games from charity shops. Because I always think, well, it's cheaper than buying a magazine, and I might find a little mechanism or some bits in there that I could be able to use. I must have about 12 copies of Risk, the one with the hundreds of little figures in. Because I could do something with that. Never have, but one of these days maybe I will.
Well, that's another industry that's gone gangbusters over the last 10 years.
Yes, it has. I mean, when I go to, there's a couple of billhooks conventions take place here in England, two or three times a year, and they're usually played in sort of games centres, and I'm always astonished at the range and the cost of these boxed board games. There's hundreds of them, and you think, crikey, somebody's making a living out of this hobby. It isn't me, but It is amazing what is out there, and
It's-
there seems to be an insatiable appetite for the things.
Well, it's amazing. Well, I mean, people might, let's say in pounds, spend $150, £150 on a game. It might have
Yeah,
miniatures, and they might play it half a dozen times, and that's it.
yeah.
But from our perspective, it's great because they're getting into games, and some of these games are actually closer to miniature gaming nowadays.
Yes.
It's a good
Yes,
entry point to get people
yes,
in our hobby, which in some cases is cheaper than board gaming.
yeah. That's right. That's right. Yeah, yeah. I mean, the big fear a quarter of a century ago was that video games would come and kill off wargaming, but they haven't, because it's a completely different experience. It's not a social experience, and it's not a craft hobby, is it?
No.
This is the attraction of it. You've got all this hand-eye coordination and the reading and the painting and the modeling, and then you've got the social side of it. Whereas sitting in front of a computer screen pressing buttons is a completely different experience.
Rightio. Last call. No. Andy, look, it's been a pleasure. Thank you very much.
Okay. Well, it's been my pleasure as well, and a good evening to all of you. Thank you very much.
And if you want to send over some playtesting copies or guys for an Australian point of view of your game, you know where to reach us. Reach out, and we've got some people.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, message me and I'll email. Well, certainly the English Civil War one, I could send you working copies. Happy to do that.
That would be fantastic.
Good. Okay. Well, just send me. Lorne got my email address, so anybody else wants to be in on it.
You can send it through the secretary account, and I'll distribute it through the club.
Okay, great. Good. Okay.
Thank you very much.
All right.
And,
Thank
look forward
you.
to talking to you sometime in the future.
Okay. Thanks very much, guys. See ya.